This is Dylan Moore with IridaTV, which you can find at IridaTV. Today, I am going to be talking a little bit about systematic politics, and we're going to be going over something really, really weird, which I guess could be summed up by the Non-Human Rights Project. That's a thing. It's like a corporation in the state of Washington. The Non-Human Rights Project is a real thing, and we're going to be looking at the real implications, negative implications for humans thereby. So one of the things that we like to focus on this show is trying to take a step back from the partisan nature of politics, or what humans naturally want to get into this football mode of my team versus your team. And I'm not saying there's necessarily anything bad about that, but there is a different world which we could describe as systematic politics, which is less about which team is winning and more about how is the system designed. A good metaphor for this would be like an airplane. If we say that the people riding in the airplane are the voting population, and then the person driving or flying the airplane is the elected official, the passengers get to vote on the pilot, and the pilot decides where the plane is going to go. That would be the partisan nature of politics. So we get in a fight in the passenger seat. I want this person to fly the plane because he's going to fly the plane better than your person, and my person, the other guy's going, well, my person is going to fly the plane better, so you need to vote for my person. We all fight about it. We go into football mode, and eventually somebody gets in the cockpit and starts flying the plane because they win the election. Systematic politics is looking more at how is the plane wired. For example, is there somebody down in the belly of the plane literally rewiring the way that it works in such a way that maybe the plane will crash? And if the plane's going to crash, ultimately it doesn't matter who is flying the plane. Does that make sense? So to make it less of a abstract metaphor, if we live in a country, the United States of America, that has a certain system, which is, I would argue, more complicated than an airplane, but that system is supposed to function in a certain way. If the basic parts that make up that system start getting changed, and we're busy fighting over who's going to lead the system, at some point it doesn't matter who's going to lead the system anymore, because the system isn't going to be there anymore. And we could take such a deep dive into this conversation, but for the sake of today, I'm going to be focusing on one aspect, and that's personhood. We, in our United States history, have really focused on rights. We're really, really concerned about what our rights are. You know, if we look at the Bill of Rights, that's the first place we typically go to have a conversation about this subject of, I have the right to do this, I have the right to do that, and as long as I'm not infringing on your rights, I have the right to do anything. And then the fight gets into, okay, what exactly is or isn't a right, and how manipulative can you be? I mean, the Second Amendment is a great example of, okay, you have the right to defend yourself, but you don't have a right to own weapons that kill other people, so we have to take the guns away. Or on the First Amendment, yes, you have the right to say whatever you want, but now you don't have the right to spread misinformation, and so we're going to, remove your ability to spread all this stuff, right? Now, obviously rights are important, but in a certain aspect they're a distraction, because we have to ask, who gets rights? Rights, you can have all the rights in the world. That's one component of the conversation. The other component of the conversation is who gets those rights. So in the more classical conversation about this, in the Bill of Rights, what is it, the fourth? I always get the fourth and the fifth mixed up. The fifth is I don't have to testify against myself. Is fourth the speedy trial? I'm sure someone will make fun of me if I'm wrong, but you got right to the speedy trial. You've got a right to confront your accusers, and you have the right to not have double jeopardy, these sorts of things. And if you are charged in a court when you have all these rights, all those rights can be then taken away because you're now a prisoner, right? So certain rights don't apply to prisoners because that's the way that the system is set up. Everybody has all these rights and they're God-given and such and such. But if you use your God-given rights to violate somebody else's rights, that is a reason to take those rights away from you by giving you a different label. You're now a prisoner, or you're an inmate, or you're a convict, or whatever word that we want to give. Or even originally, you could have been a slave. Slaves didn't have certain rights, or they didn't have any rights at all. So it's just to say what rights there are is only a part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation is who they apply to. Do they apply to persons? Do they apply to individuals? Do they apply to human beings? Do they apply to corporations? And this conversation isn't about, what rights a prisoner shouldn't have, or what rights maybe I'll touch a little bit on corporations. What rights a corporation should or shouldn't have, but more about how you could all the rights could still exist, and you could completely lose them if certain aspects of the system were adjusted. And one of those aspects is giving personhood rights to non-persons. What? Giving personhood rights to non-humans. So I might have time to get to it at the end. I'm going to put the corporations conversation on the shelf for a second, because I know corporations have had personhood rights for a long time, right? But we'll potentially get to that. Just put that on the shelf for a second. Giving personhood rights to non-persons. What examples could I possibly be talking about here? What about giving personhood rights to artificial intelligence? What about giving personhood rights to animals? What about giving personhood rights to nature, to insects, to rocks, to trees, other inanimate objects? This sounds completely crazy. But not only are there people pushing for this, there is a worldwide effort to do this. I mean, I remember back in 2000, I want to say 11, I remember reading that I believe it was Bolivia. I should have dug this up earlier. I believe it was Bolivia actually passed a constitutional amendment recognizing the rights of nature. This isn't new. And the reason I really wanted to talk about this today is because something very specific happened locally, right where in the jurisdiction where I live. In this last election, there was an initiative to put the local to give the local watershed personhood rights. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm gonna dig into the specifics here, but before I do that, there's the argument that I'm going to be making. The argument I am making is that if you give human rights to non-humans, that effectively removes human rights from humans. How? Let's say I give human rights to insects, and I'm driving my car down the freeway, and bugs are splattering my windshield. Is that now murder? Did that bee, did that fly, did that cricket, that grasshopper? They had human rights. I'm driving. Oh, maybe it's not murder. Maybe it's manslaughter. I didn't intend to do it, right? I'm driving, and I killed all those bugs by driving my car and splattering into them. It follows, if they have the same rights that humans do, I could be charged criminally for, at the very least, manslaughter, right? Now, what's weird about this is clearly a bug is incapable of doing that. Clearly a bug is incapable of doing that. So who's going to do it? Who's going to charge you for manslaughter? It's other humans. It's other humans. So going back to what happened here locally. The Snohomish River watershed now has legal rights. What the heck is the Snohomish River watershed? So I live in Snohomish County. It's a county north of Seattle. And there's a Snohomish River, right? And in Snohomish is the Snohomish River goes out into Puget Sound, which is essentially the ocean, right? And so there's this huge river delta where all these parts of the river are going out into the water, and apparently it now has rights. What does that mean? The Snohomish River watershed now has rights. There was an initiative on the ballot in the city of Everett. So this is only within the jurisdiction of the city of Everett, which the Snohomish River goes through. to give legal rights to the Snohomish watershed, or the Snohomish River watershed, and Initiative 2403 has officially passed. I couldn't believe it. I saw it on my ballot, and I'm like, please, everybody, recognize what's going on here. Don't pass this thing. This is crazy. And it passed like 55 to 45. 55 to 40. It wasn't even a squeaker. 55 to 45. That's crazy. Let's look at the text about this thing. So this is the ordinance text. I'm going to go over it. It's pretty short. An ordinance to recognize rights for the Snohomish River watershed. Whereas the health and vitality of Snohomish River watershed benefits the Everett community, economy, environment, government, and future generations by providing good water quality, supporting habitat and wildlife biodiversity, increasing resilience to environmental challenges, reducing costs associated with water treatment, and enhancing the quality of life of Everett citizens. Now, first off, that sounds good. Not knowing what was, the systematic adjustment that's going on here, I would completely agree with that. That's all true. Clean water, clean environment, clean habitat, it benefits everybody. That's 100% true. Let's go on. Whereas the current legal frameworks may not adequately protect the watershed's ability to exist and flourish. Oh, now we're getting a little weird. The watershed's ability to exist and flourish. The watershed's ability to exist. When we talk about a human's ability to exist, me in particular, right, for the sake of this conversation, like, I'm right here. It starts and stops with my body, right? Where exactly does the watershed start and stop? And, watersheds or rivers or anything in the environment, right? They will naturally move around. So if it naturally moves, does it still exist, or did it? I mean, this is kind of a Buddhist question, right? You never step into the same river twice. If it moves around, does it still exist, or is it existing in a new capacity and needs a different definition? Like, it's getting kind of weird. And flourish. What does it mean for a watershed to flourish? I mean, for humans to flourish, it's like, well, I'm able to gather more resources. I'm able to be more safe. I'm able to have more food. I'm able to procreate more and extend those same things to my children. I'm able to live in relative safety. That's what flourish means for humans. But what does flourish mean for a watershed? Let's keep going. Whereas granting legal standing to the Snohomish River watershed would allow for the watershed's rights to be represented and enforced in court. The watershed's rights. What? Whereas local residents and entities who rely on the watershed's health should have the ability to advocate for its protection. This is half weird and half sounds good. Obviously, we want clean water. Obviously, we want the environmental landscape to not be, covered in garbage and chemicals, right? But the watershed's health. How do you measure the watershed's health? Okay. We, undersigned citizens of Everett, acknowledge that the protection and conservation of our watershed is vital for sustaining both human communities and natural ecosystems. Sure. Like I said, that I don't disagree with that. Therefore, now we get into the actual ordinance. Therefore, the city of Everett does ordain A. Rights of the Snohomish watershed. The Snohomish River watershed possesses the rights to exist, regenerate, and flourish, which shall include the rights to naturally recharge, the right to naturally flow, the right to water quality necessary to provide habitat for native plants and animals, the right to provide clean water, and the right to restoration. The Snohomish River watershed shall also have the right to be free from activities or projects which violate those rights. Now, the level of vagueness here is absolutely overwhelming, right? We already talked about what exactly does right to exist mean? What exactly does the right to regenerate mean? What exactly does the right to flourish mean? The right to naturally recharge, the right to naturally flow. Does this preclude, like, okay, you can't build a dam because that wouldn't allow the water to flow? The right to water quality necessary to provide habitat for native plants and animals, and the right to provide clean water, and the right to restoration. So again, they're taking ideas that sound really good. Like, we want clean water. right? We want the water to be able to grow the natural life that the water's supposed to grow. But again, calling it rights. It has the right. It has the right. It has the right. And then B, prohibitions. It shall be unlawful, illegal for any person to violate any of the rights recognized by this ordinance. So now, here we go. Here's this absolutely vague description of the, in quotes, rights that the watershed has. It, again, where exactly does it start and stop? And then it's illegal to violate those rights. So let's get into implementation and enforcement. So again, we're now moving into, okay, the water has rights, the river has rights. Now there's physical punishment associated with this. That's what enforcement means, right? There's physical punishment associated with this. So one, enforcement by the Snohomish River watershed. This is so dorky. Clearly, the Snohomish River watershed can't enforce anything because it's not a human. Only humans, or I should say only sentient beings, of which we only know of humans, right? Maybe there's aliens that are sentient beings that we'll meet in the future, but until that happens, right now it's only humans. How can the Snohomish River watershed enforce its own rights? Let's see what the ordinance says. The Snohomish River watershed may enforce or defend the rights recognized by this ordinance through an action brought by any person with legal standing in the city of Everett in the name of the Snohomish River watershed as the real party in interest in any court of competent jurisdiction. Now you see what I was talking about at the beginning. Because these inanimate objects, or even if they're animate, these non-human objects, they can't enforce anything. You need a human to be able to enforce it. So now we have the ability of any human in the city of Everett can now go after any other human in the city of Everett if supposedly any of these incredibly vague rights have been violated. Damages and fees. Any person that violates any rights recognized by this ordinance shall be liable for any damages caused to the Snohomish River watershed as a result of that violation. So, again, what are damages? If I wash my car and the soap goes into, the car soap goes into the city drain and it drains out into the river, does that mean I just violated the watershed's rights? And now I could be charged for damages by somebody else who saw me washing my car, right? I mean, what? Or let's say I'm walking along the river and I pick up a rock and I throw it into the river. Did I impede the river's ability to flow? Right? Did I move dirt in an unnatural way? Where exactly does it start and stop? Damages shall be measured by the cost of fully restoring the Snohomish River watershed to its natural state before the violation. Now, what is the natural state of a river? Again, think of the Buddhist mindset. A river is literally something that is always changing. The Snohomish River didn't exist however many tens of thousands of years ago, right? Because there's been geological changes and ice ages and continents moving. I mean, 10,000 years isn't enough for a continent to move, but you get my point. Is that at one point in time, the river didn't even exist. And now, through actions that had nothing to do with humans, now it exists, and maybe at some point in the future, it doesn't exist anymore with having nothing to do with humans at all. And so what is the natural state of the Snohomish River watershed? Is it the snapshot that the Snohomish River watershed existed in at the time this passed? Who knows? So damages shall be measured by the cost of fully restoring the Snohomish River watershed to its natural state before the violation, and shall be paid to the city of Everett to be used exclusively for the full and complete restoration of the Snohomish River watershed as affected by the violation. So again, if I wash my car and these chemicals supposedly get into the water system, how are you going to test it? How are you going to remove it? I mean, is it going to cost $20 million to fully, get the thing back to the way, who knows? As a prevailing plaintiff in an enforcement action shall be entitled to recover all costs of litigation, including without limitation, expert and attorney's fees. Holy crap, I didn't even notice that the first time I read this. So what this is saying is if I don't like my neighbor or I don't like the business down the street and I sue them, I could hire an attorney, and if I win, The ordinance says right here, I can pass all those costs on to the losing party. So there's like literally, I mean, we'll see as this moves. I mean, this just got passed. We'll see what actually happens on the courts as we move through the future in this. But there's like no way to defend yourself, because this, me breathing could be, construed as a reason for screwing up the watershed. Me driving my car. Hey, you drove your car, and your car naturally emits sulfuric and nitric acid, and that gets into the water, and so that damaged the water, and we're going to even see, you don't even have to prove it. You don't even have to prove it. Duties and obligations. The rights of the Snohomish River watershed secured within this ordinance shall not be interpreted to confer liabilities, duties, obligations, or responsibilities on the Snohomish River watershed. So it has all rights but no obligations. So all these rights are now given to the Snohomish River watershed, but it doesn't have the duty to provide me with any water. It doesn't have the duty to provide me with any fish. I mean, up the road from Snohomish, up the road from Everett, when you go into the Sky Valley, it's famous for stinking because there's so many farms. They're fertilizing out there, right? And the Snohomish River looks disgusting because it's brown. I mean, I'm not saying that's all from like farms leaking into the river, but it could be silt or whatever. The farms are outside of city limits, but again, if this gets projected, this law continues to expand outside of city limits, now all the farms have to shut down because they're offending the rights of the Snohomish River watershed. And again, I don't want chemicals in the water. I want clean water. I want a clean environment. But this has nothing to do with creating a clean environment. This has everything to do with taking human rights away. You don't have the right to wash your car. You don't have the right to have a farm. You don't have the right to drive a car. You don't have the right to throw a rock because you're offending the rights of inanimate objects. Now, here's the best part. 4, enforcement actions and burden of proof. Where probable violations of the rights protected in this ordinance are shown to exist, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for denying or postponing enforcement or defense of these rights. So you don't even have to prove it. Hey, neighbor, I saw you wash your car, and I saw the soap go into the drain. That caused such and such damages to the Snohomish River watershed, and I don't even need scientific proof to back it up. You owe me all the cost of the attorney's fees. This is crazy. Do you see how crazy this is? I'm going to skip this part, the authority and the preemption and severability. Actually, I'm going to come back to the severability. I'll paraphrase it. Severability in any contract it basically says if any part of this contract or any part of this law is shown to be invalid or in contrast with state law or in contrast with the state constitution or something like that, all the other parts are still valid, right? We're going to get into that. Definitions. I do want to go over these definitions. The Snohomish River watershed, as used within this ordinance, shall include the Snohomish River within the boundaries of the city of Everett and shall include, but not limited to, so we don't even know where it ends, Port Gardner Bay, East Waterway, Union Slough, all these other parts, tributaries of Pilchuck and Allen Creek. So basically anything, any other wetlands, tributaries, and contributors to the Snohomish River watershed within the boundaries of the city of Everett. So if it rains, and that is eventually going to drain into something that goes into the water. Your roof is made out of asphalt, and so that asphalt is a petrochemical, and when it rains, the petrochemical makes a little bit of silt, and that silt goes down, and so your house is there is no limit to which your imagination can come up with the reason that you're violating the rights of the Snohomish River watershed. And again, this all sounds like environmental good stuff. We want clean water. We want a nice environment. We want clean air. I completely agree. We don't want garbage everywhere. But this doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with taking your rights away. Clean water means water that is free from any non-natural presence of substances. A quote from our Buckminster Fuller once, I love this, is he said that there's no such thing as something that's not natural. The fact that the universe permits it to exist means it's natural. Now, I know what they're getting here, which is that the river is not going to naturally have a bunch of benzene dumped into it unless humans do it. I get that, right? But again, this is so vague. What exactly is natural in this case? If I breathe on it, is that natural? If I pee in the vicinity, is that natural or not? I mean, the animals get to pee in the facility, but if I do it, is it unnatural? Who knows? Well, most people are on a bunch of medications, and the medication's coming out in their piss, and so they piss in the water, and the fish get, high on methamphetamine and a bunch of antidepressants and stuff. And so, yes, your piss is not natural, whereas the raccoon's piss, So clean water is free from any non-natural presence of substances, contaminants, noise. So if I'm too loud next to the water, I'm offending the rights or pollutants in quantities that may pose actual or potential harm to human health or welfare, animals, fish, plant life, or water quality. Again, who's deciding what the water quality is? Or that may unreasonably interfere with the enjoyment of life or property, including outdoor recreation. So if I create too much noise and somebody who is enjoying some outdoor recreation, like riding a bike, doesn't like it, now he could sue me for violating the rights of the Snohomish County, Snohomish River watershed, and can charge me with all the costs of the attorney fees. Woo! I'm sure some cyclists, I own everything cyclists will love this. Exist, as is used within this ordinance, shall mean that the Snohomish River watershed has the capacity to naturally perform basic functions historically common to the Snohomish River watershed. Again, this goes back to what I was saying about what snapshot are we taking in history? Like when European settlers, white settlers, first showed up, pretty sure the Snohomish River looked different from the way it looks now. When natives first showed up, I'm pretty sure from the Bering Strait or whatever, I'm pretty sure the Snohomish River watershed looked different than it looks now. Where is the historical snapshot that we get to arbitrarily pick to say this is the way it should look and not that way? Flourish, as is used within this ordinance, shall mean that the Snohomish River watershed has the capacity to naturally prosper, whatever that means, by vigorously growing and developing. Does that mean like flood? Like the river grows and develops, which in turn allows it to robustly perform its basic functions. What is robustly? What does this mean? Person, as used within this ordinance, shall mean any individual, partnership, association, public or private corporation, city, or other municipality, county, state, or federal agency. Oh, so I guess it's not giving or this ordinance doesn't specifically say it's giving personhood rights to the Snohomish River watershed, but just all these other rights. Regenerate, as is used within this ordinance, shall mean that the Snohomish River watershed has the capacity to regain its historical basic functions following a natural or man-made interference with those functions. Again, this is all aimed at being able to go after anyone about anything. This is so vague. This is so blue sky. I mean, seriously, right now I'm in the city of Everett. Is the fact that I'm using electricity, right? I drove my car here in some shape or form violating this, and now anybody, because it says anybody with legal standing in the city of Everett, and that doesn't even mean resident. I mean, like literally anybody from anywhere could come and have legal standing within the city of Everett to enforce the rights of the Snohomish County watershed or the Snohomish River watershed, and come after me and hire a horde of lawyers and then hit me with the cost of those lawyers after the fact. This is so nuts. This is one of the systematic issues that I'm talking about. Okay, let me minimize this. When I started this when I started this show, I talked about there's partisan politics, who's going to fly the plane, and then there's systematic politics in terms of how the plane is wired, right? This is rewiring the plane. The more and more human rights are given to non-human entities, artificial intelligence, rivers, plants, fish, rocks, the Great Salt Lake, I'll get to that one next. The more human rights are taken away from you. And the more the human rights are taken away from you, it doesn't matter who's flying the plane. It doesn't matter who's deciding where we're going to go, because the plane's going to crash. Now, like I said, I've done several shows on this, but I really wanted to emphasize today because, I mean, it literally hit home for me in the city of Everett. Like, now anybody could literally sue anybody for anything, because it only takes a little bit of mental gymnastics that do not require scientific proof to now hit somebody with any insane amount of charges you could think of for any reason, with these vague descriptions of, you know, what the Snohomish River watershed is, what its rights are, and how those rights are violated. Now, this sort of giving rights to non-human entities, you're going to start seeing it come out of the woodwork. You're going to see it everywhere. And I want to give another example. Let me share this screen again. There's some, like I mentioned before, there's something in Washington State called the Non-Human Rights Project. Here's their website, nonhumanrights.org. Rights protect against intolerable wrongs, no matter who you are. With persistence and rigor, we're challenging a centuries-old status quo that unjustly sees all non-human animals as legal things with no rights, which is true because they can't enforce their own rights. And I wanted to scroll down. Our clients, their clients are elephants. And is this a chimp? Some sort of ape? They're animals, right? They're trying to give rights to animals. And if you look over at their, they have a litigation page right here under litigation, challenging the rightlessness of non-human animals. So let's just again go over this a little bit. The Non-Human Rights Project is leading the legal fight to secure fundamental rights for non-human animals through a state-by-state, country-by-country, long-term litigation campaign. Our first lawsuits demand recognition of the legal personhood. There it is. There it is. The legal personhood and fundamental right to bodily liberty of individual great apes, elephants, dolphins, and whales held in captivity across the U.S. With the support of world-renowned scientists and other experts, we argue that the common law courts must free these self-aware, autonomous beings to appropriate sanctuaries, not out of concern for their welfare, but respect for their rights. Now, in terms of their welfare, I am not a big fan of caging animals that don't like to be caged. What do I mean by that? You know, when you go to the zoo and you look at, like, the penguins, for example, the penguins look completely freaking content to be living at the zoo. I don't really care about that. But you see a lion in a small cage that just sits there and paces all day, or the orcas in their tiny swimming pools where their dorsal fins start to droop over as a sign of sickness. Apparently, only orcas in captivity have that dorsal fin droop, which is, you know, iconic of the movie Free Willy, right? Like, why does Free Willy have that dorsal fin droop? Because he's sick, because he's in captivity, right? I'm not a fan of that. I really don't like animals caged up when they shouldn't be, right? But again, I'm concerned about their welfare, right? I'm not concerned about their rights. So if we keep reading, our approach is, isn't it incumbent on the judiciary to at least consider whether a class of beings might be granted a right or something short of the right under the habeas corpus law? They could consider it, but I think the consideration should be no, because they can't enforce their own goddamn rights, right? I mean, humans have to live somewhere. Like, if you want to build a house, you have to cut down a tree. And the same applies for the apes and the elephants and the dolphins. I mean, killer whales are literally the apex predator. We're going to get into whales here, right? The apex predator of the oceans. Everything in the ocean, great white sharks won't even mess with a killer whale, right? They'll kill them and rip them up and eat their liver. That's what they do, right? Seals, everything is terrified of killer whales. Nothing hunts them. So if the animals can violate other animals' rights because they need to do that in order to live, but we can't, and again, I'm not talking about, like, again, I agree, caging animals that get sick from being caged. I'm not a big fan of that, but there's a difference between that and giving them rights. Two things are getting mixed here. As human beings, we are unique on the planet, despite what this guy might say, in that we can even conceptualize of rights, right? Go back 2,000 years. There were no rights. Well, I should say the Romans came up with this idea of rights, but it was a pretty brutal idea. Like, I have the right to your body because you're a slave, sort of idea. But the idea that humans even have rights is a new concept, historically speaking, on the human stage. So the idea that these animals that can't fend for themselves intellectually because they don't have the intellectual capability to do it would have rights, it's just asinine, because, as we talked about before, the only way to enforce those rights is to have another human do it. I'm not going to read this whole thing. You could visit the website if you want to read the whole thing, but basically they're going through the idea that we're filing lawsuits to essentially work through common law, because the legislature hasn't spoken yet, the rules haven't been created yet, in order to start giving personhood and rights to non-humans. And they're actually working on laws, working to pass the first non-human rights laws in the United States. So they have a legislation tab. These people are actively pushing for this sort of legislation. I mean, it says it straight on the website. And this personhood, this idea of personhood, who is a person, is one of the fundamental systematic frameworks of what goes on in here. Because, like I said at the beginning, you can talk about all these rights, left, right, and center. We have the right to do this, we have the right to do that, or we don't have the right to do this, or rights this, rights that. But again, who do the rights apply to is what you need to like formulate a full thought. Is it humans? Is it non-humans? Is it prisoners? Is it slaves? Is it non-slaves? Is it citizens? Like, who do the rights apply to? You got to know in order to know how the system is going to function. So here's another example. And this is one that we talked about earlier. And this is one that systematic policy teams have tackled within the state of Utah. There was an attempt to do the same thing. It's not just animals. So the Non-Human Rights Project apparently is focusing on animals. Clearly, somebody is focusing on water. So, some group, I don't even know who the group is, was pushing to have the Great Salt Lake of Utah have rights. I'm sure similar to what was written in this, Snohomish River watershed ordinance that I just read. So, this is an article from InsideClimateNews.org. I'm sure it's a wonderful website. Utah legislature takes aim at rights of nature movement. Okay, there it is, the rights of nature movement. Non-human entities like corporations and municipalities have long had legal personhood in the United States law. Now, Utah lawmakers want to prevent lakes, forests, and other parts of nature from having the same legal status. That's right. So this goes on to talk about how lawmakers in Utah are advancing legislation aimed at stopping growing the rights of nature movement that has coalesced around efforts in the state to save the Great Salt Lake, which is drying up as a combination of climate change, development, and agricultural drain on its freshwater sources. Now, maybe it's a good idea to drain the Great Salt Lake. Maybe it's not. What a great conversation to have. But does the Great Salt Lake have rights? And again, if we look at, it has the right to exist and flourish, does that mean if I take a cup of water out of a river source going into the Great Salt Lake that I'm like assaulting the Great Salt Lake or whatever? Like, again, this has to do with you getting punished for utilizing the environment that you live in, that you must do in order to survive, right? Build a house in the woods. Got to cut some trees down. Build a road. Like, you got to move some dirt. You got to move some plants. You got to move some animals. The same way, like, okay, a beaver. That's a good question. With the Snohomish River watershed, if a beaver dams part of it, can we now prosecute the beaver for violating the rights of the watershed? When does this end? It's crazy. The beaver naturally does it, right? So is it natural? Is it not natural? If humans do it, is it not? It's just so dumb. So I'm not going to read this whole thing, but basically, there was a bill that was sponsored and passed, and I'm going to bring up the text of this bill. Where did I put it? In Utah, that was developed by Center for Self-Governance teams, systematic policy teams, and was effectively one person took this training, the systematic politics training that I've taken, and was able to approach a state representative and get this passed through the legislature to define personhood as what? Let's get into it. This is very short. So, general description. This bill addresses legal personhood. This is Bill HB 249 in the Utah State Legislature. So this bill defines terms and prohibits a government entity from granting or recognizing legal personhood in certain categories of non-humans. So definitions. I'm not going to get into all these definitions. It defines a body of water, a government entity, a human being. Actually, this is a good one. A human being means a member of the species classified as Homo sapiens. Let's be clear about this. Humans are humans, not anything else. Legal personhood means the legal rights and obligations of an individual under the laws of the state, or the legal rights and obligations of a person other than an individual under the laws of the state. So basically, language hovering around that a legal person is a human, right? They're just defining it backwards and forwards. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, a government entity may not grant legal personhood to, nor recognize legal personhood in 1. Artificial intelligence. 2. An inanimate object. 3. A body of water. 4. Land. 5. Real property. 6. Atmospheric gases. 7. An astronomical object. 8. Weather. 9. A plant. 10. A non-human animal. Or 11. Any member of a taxonomic domain that is not a human being. And this bill takes effect on May 1st, 2024. Boom! This state law annuls any attempt. Some stupid dipwad locally could try to pass at the initiative level for something that just happened here in the city of Everett. The Snohomish River watershed now has rights crap. This is systematic politics. This is, instead of worrying about, is it my team? Is it your team? Did the Democrats win? Did the Republicans win? Well, in the meanwhile, the whole bottom of the system is getting ripped out. And no one's paying attention to it. I'm trying to get you to pay attention to one way that a hole is being drilled into the bottom of the ship here, right? It's defining personhood. There are efforts underway all over the place, all over the world. Remember, I gave that example of Bolivia from 14 years ago or 13 years ago, whatever it was, to take away human rights, to fundamentally alter the nature of the system. So you don't have the right to do anything by giving rights to everything else other than you, other than humans. Getting in front of it isn't as hard as you might think it is. One person was able to get this, not get it passed, but influence their state reps in order for their state reps to get it passed. And it flew by the governor. I mean, what did the article say? This thing passed by a 58-11 vote. That's veto proof. So whether the Republican governor wanted it to happen or not, now that it's veto proof, there's no way to get around it. So there's actually teams right now pushing for how to accomplish this in Washington State, which again would alleviate what it would just completely annul this stupid Snohomish River watershed thing. It's so difficult to get out of the partisan politics mindset. The drama and our drive to be naturally tribalistic and play, in quotes, football. We want to have a team, and we want to have our team win, and we want to despise the other team, even if they do something that we like, if for the very reason of we don't want them to get a win because then they'll get more support in the future, right? That's human nature. And I guess it makes sense on a tribal level. You're a member of your tribe, and if your tribe, anything bad happens to it, something bad like that's your support network. Something bad happens to you, so you need to bolster your tribe no matter what, regardless of whatever principles that we adhere to. That's the way we're wired. And so, in order to even get involved in systematic politics, you actually have to take a step back from that and say, okay, we got the Democrat and Republican, which is this kind of these broad, sweeping categories that involve multiple sub-factions on both sides, right? These are people that all have their own human natures, they all have their own motivations, and they all have their own proclivities. Just assume that they're all crazy, whatever side that they're on, and you probably won't be that far off. But they all have their own motivations and proclivities. The way that, in quotes, Team Illuminati Overlord, the way I like to describe them, operates is they don't go and say, I'm team left, or I'm team right, I'm team A, or I'm team B. They don't do that. They just take a look at the landscape and say, okay, everybody has human nature, and every human has motivations and proclivities. How do we influence the motivations and proclivities of these individual humans that all have human nature to move the way that we want? And in that case, they don't care what team that they're on. Because, as I mentioned, neither team is really looking at the bottom, the foundation that the whole system sits on. Something like personhood. I mean, there's a good chance you never even heard of it until you, or you never even thought about it until you listened to this. But personhood, the definition of person, what a person is, again, you could have all the laws in the world. You could have the most beautiful legal governmental system in the world that creates a utopia. But if you're not a person, it doesn't apply to you, right? If you're not within the legal scope, the legal boundary of what that applies to, you don't count. So by destroying or adjusting the meaning of personhood, you could really start to destroy the entire system from the bottom. And the way that we get in front of it, first of all, isn't by pulling out our hair and screaming. The way that we get in front of it is, first of all, taking a deep breath, taking a step back and going, okay, how do we influence these people? And on the right, the in quotes right, obviously the stereotype is, well, these people don't give a rip about nature. They just want all the profits. They don't care about destroying the environment. And they see these environmental activists as these crazy weirdos. So getting them on board with something like this typically isn't that big of a deal. But again, now let's take that thing off the shelf that I've been, alluding to this whole time, which is companies, organizations, governmental entities having personhood rights. In the state of North Dakota, there was another guy. He actually became a state representative who took systematic politics training, used that training to build relationships in order to become a state representative. And as a state representative, he was able to get a personhood law passed in the state of North Dakota. Now, that first draft of that personhood law, which passed, I can't remember if it was committee or literally the entire House of Representatives, removed personhood rights from corporations. I don't even know what the impacts of that would be. Like, corporations have had personhood rights for so long, I don't even know what that means if we took away personhood rights from corporations. But I agree with the left that corporations aren't humans and they don't have rights. Right? I mean, maybe a corporation should have the ability to sue and be sued in court, and I understand that makes sense, but to say that a corporation has legal rights, it's not a human. Right? And so when the climate activists come out and say, hey, there's a precedent for this, which is that non-humans have had human rights forever. They're right. Corporations have had it. And then from a systematic standpoint, I believe that those rights, they shouldn't have those rights either. So there's a left and the right benefit here, right? You can talk to both of them in order to undergird the ability of the structure to hold itself together, right? And the way, let's have a dose of reality here. Most of us are reactionary. And I think COVID is like the best example of this. And 9/11 would be a great example of this as well. Is that in 2020, this whole COVID lockdown nonsense starts. We get the social distancing, we get this masking. Those are the two big things. The stabby was the thing that came afterward. And then what you should do in the medicines that you should give someone in the hospital, the ventilators, and versus the ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, all this sort of stuff. It was complete insanity. The amount of censorship that happened where everybody was taken down. And what was interesting about that is right at the beginning, all the governors, I believe except one, and it wasn't Ron DeSantis, all the governors evoked emergency powers in order to accomplish what they learned at the National Governors Association. Wait, what's the National Governors Association? All the governors of the country are members of the National Governor Association. And the National Governors Association is one of these associations, and there's associations for everything. You have a state association of county assessors, of county sheriffs, of of the National Association of Municipal Corporations, there's all these freaking associations everywhere where your elected officials meet together and they get spoon-fed not just talking points, not just arguments, but policy. They get spoon-fed the policy where the ideas are generated from places like the World Economic Forum. In the state of Washington, there's something called the Municipal Research and Services Center. Their job is literally to provide policy to cities because the situation's so complicated and you, the elected official, are too dumb to know how to do this yourself, so we're going to give you the policies for you that help you along with whatever it is that you need to do. And it doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, left, right of center, up, down, whatever. It's the same source of policies. It's this, like, in terms of how the system is going to be designed, the same source feeds the policies to both sides. And the National Governors Association is an example where that policy gets disseminated to both sides. Okay? One of the policies included taking infected patients and putting them in nursing facilities. Okay? Everybody, my understanding is everybody did that except South Dakota. Even Ron DeSantis did this. And these emergency powers that every state seemed to have were all declared simultaneously by the governors. Now, isn't it weird that every single state in the country all happened to have this same clause where a governor could declare an emergency for an indefinite amount of time and essentially act as a state legislature? It was set up like a decade prior. These are like the time frames that, in quotes, Team Illuminati Overlord works with. Is they look to the future. They look to the future and say, okay, in 20 years we need to accomplish X, so by 10 years from now we need to have Y accomplished. If they're in 2020, excuse me, the year 2000, going, okay, we know in 2020 we're going to have this lockdown COVID thing, so by 2010 we need to make sure that all the governors, amongst other things, have these emergency powers so that the governor can declare the emergency and essentially become the legislative body of the state. That's a systematic adjustment. Do you guys see that? That doesn't, like I said, they're all going to the National Governors Association. They're all getting the same marching orders, whether or not they're Democrat or Republican, and they all declare the emergency. And again, okay, yeah, Ron DeSantis didn't enforce masks, and Jay Inslee in Washington did. Okay, whatever, right? What happened in the background in terms of what's being rewired underneath the airplane? That's what's important. And stuff like personhood is super duper important. And like I said, things happen. The emergency powers of the governor is a perfect example of how things are prepared in advance for the event that's going to happen in the future. And instead of us being reactionary, and in the COVID lockdowns, an example of reactionary is, well, we're all going to get in a group and go to the grocery store and not wear masks so they can't stop us. But at the systematic level, is that changing anything of how Team Illuminati Overlord marches forward with their systematic approach of dismantling the entire system? No. So how do you prevent them from doing that? You have to get ahead of them, right? And down the pipeline is this non-human rights crap. So if we get ahead of them now, while it's easy, we're not being reactionary anymore. So 10 or 15 or 20 or 5, whatever it is on their timeline, to start really pushing forward this, artificial intelligence has rights, and apes have rights, and the water has rights, and all this sort of stuff, we will have, I don't want to say blocked, because blocked means, oh, we did it and we win, but we will be effectively competing against them in terms of rewiring the policy of our system. And you got to understand personhood to do this. And you also have to understand how effective you could be once you get out of that partisan mindset at getting these things done. I gave two examples. Utah and Idaho. Idaho is going to be the third example. Utah and North Dakota. Idaho has done this as well. There are teams that have learned that have taken training had to step back from the partisan way of doing things and engage in the systematic way of doing things. And once that happens, whether or not there's a Democratic or Republican legislature, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, because we all know that both sides are evil, right? But from what I can tell, there's really a battle in the Republican side happening now between evil and at least people trying to not be evil. In the Democratic side right now, it seems like everybody trying not to be evil has been effectively ejected, and it's completely run by crazies. Okay, I get that. However, they also have motivations, individual motivations. They all still have individual proclivities that could be leveraged against. And you can learn how to do it. And you can be effective at battling Team Illuminati overlords instead of just reactionary, right? I'm going to keep my business open. And you can't do anything about it. And I'm going to get into a lawsuit that goes on forever and ever 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 and ever. Or, if we were paying attention in the first hand, just imagine, if the governors didn't have that infinity emergency power ability, that there were teams that competed with the National Governors Association, for example, that said, hey, let's get this policy through, which says, okay, governors have the ability to declare an emergency, but they got to check in with the legislature every 30 days or something, right? For example. And let's say 50% of the states had that passed. Would we have seen a completely different outcome during the COVID lockdown crap? Obviously. So in order to be effective, we have to start thinking longer term. We have to step out of the partisan politics side of things, and we have to start identifying what are the core components of the system that are A, required for it to function correctly, and B, are being targeted by Team Illuminati Overlord to destroy it. And Personhood, there's a top three, in my opinion. Parenthood, Personhood, and Statehood. Personhood is one of the top three. If they can destroy Personhood, the whole system falls apart. So we can get ahead of it, and we can get ahead of it easily right now, because right now the preparatory work is being done. So we can get in front of that preparatory work. So whenever the big gates are supposed to come down, when the battle's supposed to happen, Team Illuminati Overlord's got to run into a wall and go, what the? Hey, wait, this is what we plan on. Huh? Where did this come from? That's how you do it. So this has been Dylan Moore with IridaTV. It really helps if you can like, share, subscribe, get this around. We're available on YouTube. We're available on Rumble. We're available on BitChute. We're available on Odyssey. We're available on Buzzsprout, which sends us all over to every major podcasting app that there is. And we're on Telegram. Come join us on Telegram. Please help get this information out because, obviously we're algorithmically challenged. And we're not going to grow very easily by the powers that be. So please help get this out, because we really, really need more and more people to start thinking this way and finding people, particularly if you're a millennial or a Gen Z before your brain is calcified into the old ways, who can learn how to do systematic politics and become effective at doing things like this and see huge successes with minimal effort. Minimal effort. Compared to, we just, okay, this is how we're going to solve everything. I just need 50 million people to think like I do, and we'll solve all the problems. It just doesn't work that way, right? The way it works is you identify key vulnerable areas in a system, and you make adjustments in those areas, and you see huge adjustments after the fact, as an effect after the fact. So again, please like, share, and subscribe. This it's a huge benefit to us, and you can check us out at IridaTV. And I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.